There are plenty of big secrets at the SCP Foundation, but sometimes you've just gotta wonder, what are the smaller secrets? Here at SCP Explained, we often zoom out to give you a bird's-eye view of the bizarre and sometimes inexplicable events concerning a huge number of anomalies. But today we're ditching our telescope in favor of a microscope to take a look into the daily life of one very special blobby boy, SCP-999, the Tickle Monster. We took the liberty of painstakingly observing SCP-999 going about his daily life, bringing joy to everyone around him. And not only were our otherwise cold, dead hearts thoroughly warmed, we were also able to compile everything we needed to make this video you're watching right now. Welcome one and all to a day in the life of SCP-999. 6:30 a.m. Rise and shine, happy campers! We discover that the Tickle Monster likes to start his day nice and early. After all, the more daylight you have out there, the easier it is to put the sunshine in people's hearts. So shortly after waking up, SCP-999 uses his little blobby pseudopods to put on some pleasant, easy-listening music in his containment chamber. Delightful. He then drinks a glass of delicious soy milk and helps himself to a balanced breakfast of chocolate, M&Ms, and a variety of tasty fruit-flavored gummies. Please note, this is not an acceptable balanced breakfast for human beings. It's important to remember that SCP-999 has very different dietary needs to us humans. Believe me, I tried the SCP-999 diet. All I got was severe sugar headaches and overtime on the toilet. But the less said about that, the better. After eating his delicious sugary breakfast, the Tickle Monster grabs a crayon and starts building his day plan, which is normally filled with a wide array of stimulating activities. Every day is a new journey into excitement for SCP-999. This is part of SCP-999's schedule that we very much recommend you emulate. Setting your goals nice and early may help you solidify your goals nice and early, and also help you feel a warm and fuzzy sense of accomplishment when the day ends and all your errands are complete. But by the time all this is done for SCP-999, it's already 8 a.m. Of course, while setting goals for the day ahead is an important task, SCP-999, in its surprisingly applicable wisdom, also knows the power of inspiration. That's why at around 8 a.m., the Tickle Monster indulges in his morning entertainment before any tasks or cross-tests begin. This largely involves watching cartoons on a television set provided to him by his handlers at the SCP Foundation. SCP-999's favorite shows include SpongeBob SquarePants, Blue's Clues, and The Backyardigans. The Foundation is extremely careful with the programming that SCP-999 is allowed to indulge in, making sure that all of the shows are generally wholesome and sweet, with positive moral messages that one can carry forward into their day. SpongeBob is a particular favorite for that exact reason. The Tickle Monster sees that plucky yellow sponge as a kind of kindred spirit, reminding him to keep a positive, can-do attitude and a sense of childlike fun. After a few episodes of the show, 999 is typically bouncing with joy, and more than feeling SpongeBob's iconic catchphrase,
"I'm ready!"
And while it isn't necessarily relevant, we'd also like to state that within the confines of this metaphor, Dr. Gears is Squidward. Moving on. 10 a.m. Now the Tickle Monster is really ready to take on the day. Having filled up on the two essential C's of any prosperous day, candy and cartoons, he's ready to slither out there and make a difference. His first order of business for the workday is sitting in on the daily Site-19 Senior Researcher meeting, where the top brass of the site is given a collective debrief on the day's tasks, and given an opportunity to share any vital information. Of course, morning meetings can be stressful, especially when you work at the SCP Foundation, where your daily task might be, SCP-682 seems particularly cantankerous today. Mind paying a visit to his containment chamber and asking him about it? However, SCP-999 being there in the room is kind of like having the ultimate scented candle. He exudes those chill, relaxing vibes and even the pleasant smell that puts you in a place of profound ease. The Foundation has discovered that since SCP-999 has started sitting in on the morning meetings, both employee satisfaction and task completion have increased. Happy workers, as it turns out, are also hard workers. When the meetings end and the senior researchers are filing out of the room, each one of them gives SCP-999 a little hug or a pat in hopes of thanking him for all he does. This increases their emotional well-being as well as SCP-999's. It's one of the rare everyone wins scenarios you'll find at the SCP Foundation. After the meeting, SCP-999 tends to roam around the site for a while, searching for anyone in need. As you probably already know, the Tickle Monster has an innate sense for when people are in need of his unique brand of anomalous positivity. If a researcher or a guard is feeling down, SCP-999 will have an innate sense of their presence and mercilessly hunt them down to give them some pep they'll never forget. Allow us to give you a specific example. Security Officer Dan Richardson was stressed. While he didn't let on to anyone else working at the Foundation, fearing that showing emotion would make people think less of him, his wife was actually struggling from a severe illness. So when he went into work, even when he was guarding the containment chambers of truly terrifying monsters like SCP-106, he was only ever worrying about her. Nobody else knew, except for SCP-999. When the Tickle Monster sensed Dan's distress, he slithered over and began to climb on him, unleashing his rays of anomalous good vibes. Soon enough, Dan felt a kind freedom he hadn't experienced since the beginning of his wife's illness. Later that day, he felt the courage to visit the Site-19 employee mental health counselor at last, and became open about his emotional struggles. It began a long but worthwhile road to recovery, all of which began with SCP-999. And then the Tickle Monster broke for lunch. 12 p.m. At around midday, every day, SCP-999 slithers on over to the main Site-19 cafeteria to enjoy a wholesome lunch with Foundation personnel and some of the other friendly anomalies that do lunch with them. He'll grab a bowl of ice cream and a colorful jello pot from the friendly lunch lady and slither on over to the table where SCP-073 Kane and SCP-343 God are sitting around chatting.
No hard feelings about the whole, Mark thing, right?
God says, biting into his hamburger. It is a process, Kane replies. Any awkwardness that was there before immediately evaporated when SCP-999 entered the scene. Both of these mysterious anomalies smiled and began petting him as he cooed and trilled. God levitated the spoon to feed 999 his ice cream, which Kane thought was a little show-offy, but held his tongue because he was lost in the moment. Kane helped 999 peel off the lid to his jello pot with his precise mechanical fingers. Dr. Clef, who was eating a few tables over, also dropped in to give SCP-999 a playful pat on the head. And given that Dr. Clef typically has the sensibility of an Xbox 360 Call of Duty lobby, this show of vulnerability was an exceptional act indeed. Dr. Bright would have done the same, but he was spending lunch in O5 Council detention again because he did something really stupid again. What was it this time? See if you can guess. 1:30 p.m. After lunch, SCP-999 would spend the next half an hour having the nature of his father, the terrifying Scarlet King, explained to him. For those privy to certain secret documents, you'll know that SCP-999 comes from the most unlikely of parents, the interdimensional, universe-destroying monarch of chaos and evil known as the Scarlet King. He was actually the progeny of the Scarlet King's seventh bride, whose son was prophesied to one day defeat and dethrone the Scarlet King, not through violence and hatred, but through a love and kindness so great it burns out the Crimson Khan's darkness. Of course, he's not ready to go toe-to-toe with his estranged father just yet, nor would the Foundation want him to. They've made mistakes in the past by being too gung-ho and prematurely weaponizing anomalies under their care. Just look at the absolute disaster that unfolded when they tried to make Abel part of a mobile task force, and he killed all his Foundation comrades when they ran out of missions to give him. That's why they've decided to take a very different approach with SCP-999. Rather than pushing him too hard too early, they've decided to start drip-feeding him the knowledge, piece by piece, every day after lunch. Some of the more scholarly researchers have been reading him choice extracts from Davite scriptures concerning the Scarlet King. They always follow it up with a little Rupert the Bear though, just so things don't get too intense. 2 p.m. After this unique SCP Foundation take on storytime is done, SCP-999 is once again free to roam around the site, dispensing joy to whoever needs it most. Something you need to understand about SCP-999 is that he's utterly non-judgmental. Even a beast of pure violence and hatred like SCP-682 is considered a potential friend to 999. You may even remember the time that 999 was able to live up to his name and tickle the hard-to-destroy reptile into submission, inducing a hysterical laughing fit in this otherwise hardcore beastie. That's why 999 would sometimes stray into the dark, spooky areas of the site that most people would fear to tread if they weren't specifically assigned there. For starters, he nestled up against the outside of SCP-049, the Plague Doctor's cell. The sinister surgeon was feeling a little down in the dumps due to his continued failure to stamp out the pestilence, and the SCP Foundation's stubborn unwillingness to help him in the task. However, a loving visit from the Tickle Monster, even on the other side of a plexiglass divider, was enough to chase the blues away, just when he needed the encouragement most. This strengthened the doctor's resolve. He would continue his research, no matter how many lives it took to perfect his curative method. Admittedly, not the best result of an interaction with SCP-999, but 999 was at least happy that the peculiar beaked man seemed a little less depressed now. At least, even if the lack of depression may lead to a few further murders down the line. Who would be next on SCP-999's rampage of joyfulness and positive vibes? SCP-999, like the benevolent, is a friend to all children, so he does what he can to improve the quality of life for anomalous children contained by the SCP Foundation. As part of his daily rounds, he makes sure to always visit SCP-053, the young girl, as his positivity aura is too powerful for the girl's anomalous ability to passively cause paranoia and violence to affect him. She often reports having a wonderful time during their sessions, though she wishes her big dragon friend could come join in on their tea parties too. 4 p.m. By this time, SCP-999 is back to roaming again, searching out people or anomalies he can lend a helping hand to. Helping people, if you hadn't somehow realized it by now, is one of 999's greatest joy in life. That's why when slithering near the high-security humanoid containment wing and seeing groups of researchers running for the hills, he got the sense that perhaps he was needed here, and decided to investigate further. As all of the researchers ran screaming in one direction, SCP-999 slithered audaciously in the other. He heard one of the researchers yelling, "The old man got out! Sound the alarm and run for your lives!" Of course, this did nothing to deter SCP-999, even as the containment breach sirens blasted through the air around him. 999 didn't fear death, he only feared failure. Failure in the task to make everyone around him as happy as possible, up to and including some of the most horrific and depraved monsters the SCP Foundation has ever contained, very much including the monstrous creature coming towards him down the hall. The old man, SCP-106, gave a throaty chuckle as he shuffled down the tiles, his black goo fizzling on the ground. With one hand, he traced his fingertips along the wall, spreading corruption that ate away at the wall like a cancer. With the other hand, he dragged a rapidly melting corpse that had once been a hapless researcher standing too close to the wall of 106's containment chamber. Now, the old man was eager to cause more pain and havoc in the rest of the facility before he was forced back into containment, until he ran into SCP-999 coming towards him in the hallway. Suddenly, 106 felt something change in his mind. His typically sharp, predatory, sadistic thoughts suddenly felt odd and fuzzy, almost formless. It was almost like he'd been hit by some kind of anomalous chloroform that dulled the edge of his evil. And then, he was laughing. Why? Because this strange blobby creature had crawled up onto his body and begun to tickle him relentlessly. It didn't make sense. How come this creature wasn't affected by his corrosive mucus? But it was already too late. He was doubled over onto the floor cackling, and unlucky for the old man, but luckily for everyone else, it was enough to pacify him until a mobile task force with high-intensity lights showed up and shepherded him back into containment. It was a truly humiliating defeat for SCP-106, but at the same time, he'd be churlish to deny that he had somewhat of a good time. 7 p.m. As we get deeper into the evening, SCP-999 still has plenty to do. After all, every day that ends at the SCP Foundation also heralds the end of many people's lives. And that's on a good day, too. Needless to say, there would always be plenty of people who needed cheering up at the end of each day, and nobody was more up to the task than the Tickle Monster. First, SCP-999 decided to make its way down to the Site-19 medical bay to treat everyone who'd experienced varying degrees of horrific injury from a typical day's work at the Foundation. Some were horrifically burned, Others were missing parts. Some were pretty much catatonic with the mental trauma of the things they'd seen. Many had distinctive fresh wounds that could only come from SCP-682's massive claws and fangs. It was a powerful wellspring of misery. SCP-999 slithered from bed to bed, nuzzling up to the different patients of the medical bay and lifting their moods. You'd be amazed at the medicinal benefits of a positive mindset, and he's one of the few medical treatments that won't utterly destroy you if you don't have insurance. After helping the injured, SCP-999 decided to visit the D-Class barracks. While most of the SCP Foundation looked down on the lowly D-Classes, especially given the criminal history of many of them, SCP-999 held no such prejudices. He sensed that the people in the barracks were confused and scared for their safety, and that was enough for him to get in there and help. He slithered through the gangway, observing that some of the bunk beds were empty from the day's less stressful tests. These hardened criminals, many of which were literal murderers, immediately felt themselves softening in the presence of this cheerful, blobby creature. For the first time in many of their long, difficult, and tragic lives, they dared to believe that perhaps everything might be okay sometime in the not-so-distant future. And SCP-999 couldn't be happier about that. 9:30 p.m. As the night winds down, one of the researchers assigned to SCP-999 reads him a bedtime story to help him wind down after an exciting day. SCP-999 tries not to go to bed too late at night, knowing that an early bedtime and an early rise ensure health and energy. Whale song and white noise is played over a small radio, while SCP-999 settles down to sleep, ready to have only the sweetest dreams. So ends another wonderful day. And there you have it, folks. A day in the life of the endlessly adorable SCP-999. Is there anything from the Tickle Monster's daily routine that you think you might start incorporating into your own day-to-day lives? Let us know down in the comments. Personally, in a world that can sometimes be cold and cruel, we think having the strength to be a little kinder and smile a little brighter can make a far bigger difference to some people than you'll ever understand. And nobody exemplifies that better than SCP-999. Now go check out SCP-999 Tickle Monster vs. the Most Evil SCPs, and Children of SCP-001 The Scarlet King, Is SCP-999 Really His Son? For more tales of this wholesome blobby boy.